just put that on. So at any rate, the question was: does Saudi Arabia export oil to Israel? The answer is no. And so if you ask Saudi Arabia as the reporter and Israel as the partner for trade in petroleum, it'll say there's an error in the information. So sometimes these are some of the problems that take place. One, I hope Watanabe-san can come. He wasn't here last week. Haven't heard from him, and I know one fellow student in the other class was saying that he was okay. He was just busy or something. I don't know. So we'll see if he comes. But as I say, I haven't heard from him. Let's see. And you got my did you understand what I was saying? Some of it it's a bit some of it is a bit I'll show you some of what I want you to think about. And let's just start with let's look at this. This is data for India. And I wanted to show you some of the, how does that, yeah, let me do this. One of the things that you were doing, you were taking net. You were taking the net, like on sum of compensation of employees and property income to and from net. And I said, you want to look at the more detailed figures. If you can get it more detailed, that's useful. The reason is that the net may not quite tell you the picture. For example, if the sum of a lot of this is property income. So that means if foreigners are investing in the country and they're taking profits out of the country, that as in the form of income, that's going to show up on this line. And so you could have a situation like in Greece where there's a big increase in property income. And the reason is that, remember, and let's go back to when the country is a net borrower, when the country is a net borrower, one of the things that is the net exports, savings minus investment. Well, that's if you're importing more, probably your savings are falling. Which means, and if it's negative, like if this is very negative, then what in Greece's case, well, that means that the savings is going to drop. They're going to be short investment. So foreigners are making investments. So that money has to come from somewhere. It comes from outside the country. Well, if you invest in a business in another country, you're not doing it just to be a nice person. You're doing it to make money. You want the income that the assets that you're investing in, because you're making an investment. You're investing in businesses in the country. So you want the asset. You want that income. And so that line is here. That's here, and if you look at that data, if you remember, look at that data, you'll see a big increase between 1999 and 2008 in this sum of compensation of employees and property income to the rest of the world. And the reason is that because they were borrowing so much money, the only way to finance it, they had you have to sell. If you're running a negative balance of payments, then you have to sell assets. That's how that's how you finance a negative balance of payments. You have to sell something. You have to sell assets. So basically company. Foreigners are coming in and buying your businesses. So when they're buying the businesses make money. They're taking the profits out of the country. That's showing up on this line. So that's why that increased. So you can see it shows you what was going on. So Greece is borrowing a lot of money. They're spending more than they're earning. It's financed. Yes, they're borrowing so they can buy, but to pay for it, they have to sell. A country has to sell assets. That's why these identities are so important, and to remember because it helps you to remember all of the relations that each country is having with other countries. So that's why you were looking at the net, but the really important thing is to look down and seeing the trend, especially in the country that you're looking at, Greece, that you're seeing that increase and it's because they have to sell assets that earn money. The foreigners then are earning the profits and taking the profits out of the country. So that's why that number goes up a lot. I'm trying to think, did you have any, you asked me a question about your China, did you? What was your question?
My question is,
FDI. You asked a question about FDI. And where it was coming from?
I can guess that.
Yeah, you got that data? Okay, good. Yeah, that's, no, that data, does it only go up to about 2010? Is it like 2010 or 2012?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that you might want to just check the Chinese central bank and see if they have if they might have. I don't know if it would be in Japanese, but it would certainly they might have information in English. That might, sometimes the central banks have more recent information. So you might want to check and see if you can get any more recent information, because a lot is happening now. Now it might be that they don't want to release that information yet. You know, they might be slow about releasing that information. One of the interesting things about India, and I'm going to talk about India today, is when you look at Indian data, you can see that they're really trying to get the right number, but there's so much information that they can't get, and the numbers are so up and down in say an industry from one year to the next, and you look at it, you say, and I'm thinking it's just useless information. I can't make any sense out of it. It's very hard. It can be very hard to work with it. Whereas the Chinese data, sometimes you can go through this. There can be a lot of data. All the tables are all filled in, and people are just making numbers up. They're just making up a number. that somebody above them thinks looks good. So sometimes you have that. So that's the problem. You can have that with Chinese data. So and you know sometimes we can't do anything. You know, if they do that, you can't do anything. No, and one of the I wanted to look at data for India on the labor market. So I went to the Indian government websites on the labor market, and the information, they've got lots of sectors. They'll give you employment numbers, and the numbers don't make any sense. I don't, you know, if I got up and reported it to you, I couldn't report any trend, because one year it'll be here, the next year it'll be here, the next year it'll be up there, the next year it's down there. And it's not because anything is going up or down, it's because there's so much of the Indian economy is a cash economy. So much of the Indian economy is a cash economy that it's hard to measure. So they don't know what's going on. In fact, one of the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about in the lecture today, some very important changes that are taking place in India that are going to make it possible so that the government can get a better idea what actual transactions are taking place in the economy. And that is it's a very important change that's just taken place in the last 2 weeks, in fact. And I'll be talking about that later. But what I want to talk about right now with India is you can see what, and this is, you might run into this in data sometimes. So you see how this, let's say we got gross domestic product, and this is for, this is from table 1.1. It's table 1.3, but it's the same figure as table 1.1. And so this is, and you'll notice here's a time series, and then it changes from the 100 to the 1000 series. And you'll see that that was the figure under the 100 series, and then below is the figure under the 1000 series. So what you have to, so they're saying this is what they're reporting this number, and they're reporting this number. As an analyst, what you have to do then, so that you can make a comparison between this number and this number, is use this as the adjustment. So this would be 87,360.4 divided by 90,097. So it's about like 0.96. So then you'd multiply, in order to convert this number to this number, you have to multiply it by about 0.96. So you have to do that with all of these numbers. So in fact, what I've done when I've had this situation is that's what I've had to do, is take the number, make a new time series based on this information. They won't do that. They're just, because they're reporting, these are the numbers that they reported based on the method that they use. But the best thing you can do is they're also giving you both approaches here, and then I use that to convert the time series. You'll have to do that. That's a very common problem in this data, because this is just a new way of computing GDP. It's a better way. They're getting more data. So there's more data, and they're getting it's a better picture. But you don't have this on the past data, but you have to make an assumption that all of these are going to change by the same amount. And then you get a time. You get a time series. So that's what I've had to do. In fact, that's what I've had to do here. So as I said, this is just an example. I want to show you some of the problems that you might run into with your data. That in learning how to deal with international. This is the real world of international economic data. We're in an international economics department. So if we're going to study international economies, these are the kinds of things things that we need to learn in order to do that. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is about India is the population. Okay. India is a gigantic country. It's a gigantic country. It probably has, well, this is the 2011. This is what they say, the population. I don't think anybody has any real idea how many people actually live in that country. Probably the Chinese number is better. They're going to have a better idea. It's probably a more organized government and society. One of the problems with India is that it's made up of 30 states. India has, like we have 47 prefectures here, China provinces. Well, India has states, and there's 30 states. Well, the states are very independent. They almost run as separate countries. Until 2 weeks ago, they had separate tax systems. And if you were trading, if you were trading between states, you have border controls between the states, so it hardly acts as a country. It's really like it's a collection of 30 different countries in certain ways. So the thing you have to remember when I'm talking about India and I'm talking about these numbers, nobody really, these are the best numbers that we can get, that's probably going to improve. It's probably going to improve, but at least this is the way it is now, and you have to realize this is some of the problems if you're studying a country like India. At any rate, the most recent census was 2011. It said there was 1.21 billion people. It's thought to be the least urbanized country among the 10 largest national economies in the world. It's a very, very rural society. Only 31% of the population was officially classified as living in rural areas in the 2011 national census. And those are minimum of 5,000 population, 75% of male workers employed in non-agricultural sectors, and density of at least 400 per square kilometer. Now, 400 per square kilometer is not very high. That's a densely inhabited district in this country is 4,000. If you know what a DID, if you've heard that term, if you've ever worked, if you work with Japanese census data, you'll see they use a term called DID, and it means densely. It's in the data. We'll say DID means densely inhabited district, and that the minimum is 4,000 per square kilometer. And in Japan, 67% of the population live in DIDs. So you have 30% of the population, only 30% of the population, and these are with at least 400 per square kilometer. These aren't even, wouldn't consider this an urban area, much of this. So even that 30%, a lot of that is hardly urban. And it says 75% of male workers employed in non-agricultural sectors. That means 25% of male workers could still be employed in the agricultural sector, and it would be considered urban. So you're talking about 31%, these are the minimum. This is a very rural, it's a very rural country. But there's some of it, but some people also think that there's some evidence that the periphery of large urban areas, which are slums, lacking infrastructure, are currently classified as rural, even though many residents commute to work in a nearby metropolitan region. So there are these slums around large cities, and some people think it could be as much as 10 percentage points higher. Again, this is one of the problems with India. Every time you look at the data, it's the number, it's very, all of the picture that you're painting is a very hazy, it's a very hazy picture. And although, well, one of the interesting things is you do appear to be seeing that the population of urban areas are growing more rapidly. The population of urban areas are growing at grew at about 3% per year, a little bit less than 3% per year. The rural population was growing at a much slower rate. Now, what's interesting about, another thing that's very interesting about India, at least until very recently, is that there is relatively little rural to urban migration. It's a country, and one of the problems is that India has what's called the caste system. If you know what the caste system, let me write that on the board here. The caste system. People are classified. People are, and based on. It's basically to tell what level of society that people are in. If you're a member of a high class caste, then you have a certain high social status just because you were born in that caste. And if you have a low social caste, then you're in a low, you have a low status in the society. Now, legally, this was abolished. The distinction was made illegal more than 50 years ago, but nobody's ever paid any attention to it. It's one of those things that the society has had very little real change. It passed a lot of legislation, but in order to change this, but it hasn't. There hasn't been a lot of change. It means that you can't move between castes. It's difficult to marry from one caste to another. It makes it difficult for people to move. People don't move in search of jobs. They tend to stay. They largely stay in the place where they were born. That is a very common thing, as we'll see. There's one of the information that I have here is the amount of movement that people make, and in here it shows that the figures for 1991 and 2001. It says here that this 1961, 1971, only 18.7% of the increase in urban population was generated by rural-urban migration. That's dramatically different than what we've seen, than the process of urbanization that we see in most industrial countries. Most industrial countries will see a massive immigration, movement of population. You've seen that in Europe, in the United States, you've seen it in Japan, you've seen it in China. It has not happened in India. India is a very different society. And that's one of the problems of the country changing its economy and changing as is that you have these traditional aspects of the society that make it very difficult for people to change their life situation. And as it shows here, over a 40-year period, there was relatively little change, and it's even thought between 2001 and 2011, only about 22% of population growth in urban areas was generated by migration. So even now, there's still a relatively small amount of migration. Now, we may start to see that kind of change, and if we do, this country is going to change dramatically. Now, it's thought that one problem is that it appears the India's economy has generated relatively few new jobs in recent years. It appears, and that's one of the problems. I went to look at the, as I say, I went online, the India Department of Labor and the labor statistics. I wanted to prepare the lecture and get some labor sector data, and I looked at it. There's nothing to do with using. I don't know what you can't analyze it. There's nothing to analyze. The numbers don't make sense. The changes don't make sense. It goes up and down. Nothing makes sense. So it's just, and they've got charts and tables and all kinds of things, and it's just useless. You can't do anything with it. I don't know how anybody analyzes the country, really. So here's some figures, and I got this out of a paper. This was a paper where some Indian economists were writing about this. So I assume, well, maybe they know a little bit more than I do. And rather than trying to punish myself, I got some figures that they have, and one of the things it shows is that they're claiming that the manufacturing sector between 2004 and 2009 actually shrunk. Now, the interesting thing is that I looked at the labor data. I don't know, and maybe they don't know either. And this is just what the figures show. But the figures supposedly show that there's not much growth in manufacturing. Some growth in the service sector, that's non-manufacturing. This is part of the service sector. Well, this is certain kinds of service, but non-manufacturing, that would be generally the service sector. You can see a shrinkage in the agricultural sector. But remember, this is a country that's at least 60% rural, 1.2 billion people. There's over 700 million people living in rural areas that are mostly agricultural work. A loss of 23 million is not much. And they're showing a total change in jobs of 2004-2009 of 1.3 million. Now, what's interesting here is that the country was actually starting to grow rapidly. So that's another curious thing, is the country is growing rapidly, yet there are no more new jobs. I don't know. Who knows? It's another. They're claiming these people claim the number of workers were risen. So the total share of workers in the agricultural sector are not falling rapidly. It's just a very difficult picture. One of the interesting things, and that I thought about this paper, I was looking at the migration, and as I said, I talked earlier that the caste system makes it difficult for people to change their situation. It makes it difficult to change. If you're in a lower caste, it's hard to get a job. If you're in a really low caste, nobody will hire you. Doesn't matter how smart you are, they just won't hire you. It's hard to get an education. It's hard to move. You can't marry up it's difficult to marry up into another caste. All of these things have been traditionally frozen. And so these figures that show the migration between in the country. Now, remember what I said at the start of the lecture. I talked about how the 30 states of India act almost like they're different countries. It's like it's a collection of different. They have different languages. Many of these states have their own languages. Some of them are majority Muslim. In the east, there's a more Asian population. You have the Bengalis in Kolkata in West Bengal. You have they're incredibly different ethnic groups as well as language. The only thing that kind of binds the country together is the Hindu religion. That's kind of the only thing, except that you do have a lot of Muslims, especially in the western states. So one of the interesting things that this shows is this shows for migration, rural, from a rural place to a rural place, rural to an urban place, urban to a rural place, and urban urban to urban. And what this shows is, let's see, what is that? Of total, interstate. Right. This adds up. It's the intrastate within. That means within the state. So rural to rural within the state, 95.4%. It's all within the state. Rural to urban, 80% in the state. Less than 20% was, but in 1999-2000 was between states. There's an urban to rural. These are relative figures, and urban to urban. A lot of the migration, what it means is a lot of the migration is rural to rural, and you can see that 2007, 2008, the figures don't change very much. It's a little bit more urban to urban. Rural to rural is still is still interstate. Rural to urban, maybe a little bit more interstate. But still, it's mostly within. The important thing here is that it's within states. People don't move. They're not moving. And in fact, one of the things we'll see here is that they're not moving very much. These are I'm trying to and they have these are rates per thousand. I think this is per thousand people. And you can see it's a fairly low rate. The female migration, the male migration rate in rural areas is very low. Men don't migrate, and look at the migration rates of women are 10 times higher. And so you're thinking, oh wow, women are moving for jobs, and yeah, it's a society where women are moving for jobs. There's more male migration in urban areas. But it's still less than female migration. But in fact, it's not the migration. The migration, and this is per thousand migrants in each group, and this is by income class. So the lowest income to the highest income. And you can see the male migration rate per thousand migrants is very it's very low. It's a very low migration rate. Women at the higher income rates, there's more migration, a little bit more migration, and this is per thousand. This is per the thousand migrants. There's just not much. It's a fairly most of the men that are migrating. It's in the higher income, if they're migrating. The women, it's fairly even. Now, what's interesting here when you look at and this is again by consumption, it's basically by income. You can see that the male migration rate it increases by income. So these are most of the poor rural people. The poor, they just don't migrate. There's very little migration, very little male migration. So this is a completely different pattern than what we tend to see in other countries. it's a very different pattern. And where you do see the migration, there's more of it. There's more of it in the upper income classes, so men in the upper classes, the upper income classes may be moving for jobs, but not in the lower classes. So it's because of the caste system. It's keeping the country. It's kind of frozen. The country is staying to a fair degree frozen. Now you'll ask, well, why are all these women? Why aren't? Oops. Does that show? Okay. Do I show that here? One of the I need to discuss that here. It appears that women are migrating for marriage. They're not migrating for work. They're being sent by their family to another place for an arranged marriage. So this migration, so you have this 10 times these women are being sent to another village, usually local, occasionally in another state, but it's basically for arranged marriages. That's it. They're very seldom moving for work. It's an arranged marriage. The family is sending their daughter. The family that daughter is married into pays a dowry to the family with the daughter. It's basically they're in effect selling their daughter to that family. So this is the large percentage of the female migration movement. So the picture that I'm painting here is one of a very traditional society. This is not China. If you look at China, you'll see massive migration. And even when the Chinese government said they couldn't migrate, well, they migrated anyway. They went to millions of people went illegally from the interior to the coastal cities, particularly Shanghai, cities like that, and lots and lots of illegal migration. China is just a much more, and as I say, the thing about China is that you just can't, the government can pass all kinds of laws. They could be a very repressive, restrictive government, but Chinese will still do what they want. It's a very hard country to control. They don't follow rules. It's very different from this society. People, if you put up a sign that says no smoking, people won't smoke. In China, I remember the first time I went to China, and I was in a bar, and there were these young men playing pool, and there was a sign over the pool table that I could read it, and it said, I knew it said no smoking, and everybody was smoking. They just didn't. It's like nobody cared. It was just the first indication that I had. That the rules, they don't care. I've been in Shanghai, and the light is red, and everybody's walking. The traffic is coming this way, and it's like, the hell, and they're blocking the traffic, and it's the light is red, and they don't care. It's like it's and if you're going up an escalator, and somebody will stand in front of you, they don't care if you're trying to get by. You'll stand there and they'll let you wait for them to notice you, like here, and people will notice you, and I'm sorry, they'll move. They'll just sit. They don't care. It's just it's that kind of society. Nobody follows the rules. But here, it'd be fascinating to go there. I think here it's just such a my sense is the society is so rigid that everybody just does what they've always done. It really that's the sense that I get, and the sense of what you would have to do try to change this country. Now, I'm going to talk about the GDP components. Now we'll go into analysis of the economy. The thing what I said about all of this data I had to, up to 2010, all of this I had to make that adjustment. So this is all, these are adjustments that I've had to make to this data so that I can make an apples to apples comparison across time. So that's what's going on here. As I showed you earlier, here, see that I've made that. These tables are the adjustments that I've made. As I say, you may run into this kind of problem in either in this class, or if you're doing some other, if you're studying in another class, you're studying the economy of a country, you may well run into this kind of problem. At any rate, you can see this is at current prices. In 2003 to 2014, this is the most recent data that was published on the UN site. And you can see actually consumption is a fairly significant percentage of GDP. We'll look at that more closely. And it's grown at a fairly steady rate. Let's see. And for the most part, these major sectors seem to grow at about the same rate. Although government, the interesting thing is that government grows more slowly, probably than the rest of the economy. And what's interesting about that is that the government sector, the public sector, has an incredible amount of rules and regulations in this country. It's very hard to get anything done because you have what we call red tape. You have to go and talk to this bureaucrat, that bureaucrat, and there's a lot of bribes. People have to pay bribes. All of this. So there's a lot of corruption. But the government itself is not at least in terms of output, is not a big part of the economy. You can see here that basically every year there's a trade deficit. So there's exports minus imports is negative. Not unusual for a developing country, as I've talked about in some for other countries. It's a country that needs capital. So if you need capital, your savings are going to be tend to be less. Your net exports tend to be negative. Savings are less than investment. So you end up with a negative exports minus imports. And again, I've done this this is done at constant prices. And at constant prices, we can see that the economy over 11 years about doubled. It more than doubled in size. It's about a 6% growth rate, less than China. That it's definitely an economy that's grown a lot less than China. And when you're talking about in China, you had for many of these years more than 10% annual growth rates. The difference between 10%, 11, 12%, and 6% it's not really double. It's compounded. It produces a huge difference in the size of the economy. But India's grown faster than it did in the past. In the past, India grew at very slow rates. When the society was more dominated by the society was more dominated by the upper class. The upper class caste had very little interest in having the economy grow. More growth for them was a loss of control, and they were able to control the growth because of the caste system, even though they passed legislation that said they made it illegal. And so the country for many years didn't change very much. And that was particularly when it was run by the Congress Party and the Gandhi family that basically ran the country for many years after independence in 1947 until pretty close around 2000. That's been different. Now we're seeing the economies open up, and one of the reasons why is because the Indians went abroad, and some people started making a lot of money, became wealthy in the United States and other countries, and then took their wealth and went back to their native country and started changing things. And so this is a pattern. This is one of the things that has changed India, is that people emigrated from the country, became wealthy in another country, and then brought their wealth, some of their wealth back and started changing their own country, which changed the people that ran, the upper classes that ran the country. So you had that kind of change. So when we look at here, the investment grows more rapidly, and this is interesting. You do see it's almost triple. The economy grows a little bit more than double. Investment increases more rapidly than other sectors, and exports and imports grow more rapidly. The country during this period, the country began opening up more for international trade. It opened itself up more to the world. So you're seeing more exports, more imports. It's growing at a more rapid rate compared with other sectors of the economy. So this shows the year-on-year change in the components. I just put the NIPIsh. They don't have any figures there. It's not a big figure anyway. But you can see that. Let's just look at GDP. Now they've shown here it's like 10%. Actually, 10% in this period. This was the effect of the financial crisis. So the growth slowed. The growth in India did slow during that as a result of that, but it picked up again, and you had some fairly rapid growth. As I've said, it's been about 6-7%. This is more recent. Actually, I'm looking at this, and for some of this, I stated earlier that it's grown slower than China. China was growing more rapidly, but these figures are actually, I'd forgotten that it had grown that much. The figures actually are actually fairly impressive, and you can see, especially here, it's driven by investment. Now, one of the issues in India is a lack of infrastructure. There's a lack of electricity, electric generating capacity, of electrical transmission. There's a lack of roads. There's a lack of water systems, sanitation systems. It's just the complete lack throughout the entire society and the economy. China has much better infrastructure than India. So China, I talked about last week a bit about the growth of. I think I talked about it last week. The amount of infrastructure that China's invested a lot in infrastructure, and some people think it might be too much. We're going to find that out. Although the economy's still going. India was more. Its infrastructure has grown more slowly. Although you can see it's reasonable growth rates for at least in this period. A little bit here, but we've also had some slow areas. So India has had some slow growth in investment over that period. Consumption is fairly steady, It's fairly steady, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9, sometimes 9% growth. With the real rapid growth, as you can see, was driven by investment income, by investment in infrastructure, in business. Let's see, did I get that? Right, here we go. Okay. This is the real GDP component share. So this is the share of GDP. And one of the things we see, and you can see, is how investment has grown as a percentage of GDP. It's actually fairly healthy, to a fairly healthy level, 39%, 39. China, as we've seen, is in the mid to upper 40s. India's investment as a share of GDP is not quite as high as China, but fairly impressive relative, certainly much higher than what you would have in countries like the US and Japan. Typically here, roughly 20%, 15 to 20% of GDP. So this tells you it's a developing country. It's the signature of a country that's developing. We've also seen, as I mentioned, the growth of exports and imports as the Indian economy became more connected with the world. So that's how you can look when you see this kind of growth across exports and imports in an economy. That tells you that there's more connection. The country is becoming more connected with the global economy. Another thing is that I'm looking at the discrepancy. The discrepancy, the reason why I put this is you want to get a sense. The discrepancy tells you how accurate the data might be, or at least the data that they collect, whether it's complete, how much data might be missing, and these figures are actually quite low. So at least for the data that it may be that the financial authorities that collect this information, they may have done as good a job as they can do. So the it drops a lot past these early years, and so it's quite low after that. Let's see. Look at the exports minus imports. That's fairly high. You can see it's fairly. It's fairly high. One important thing you want to, when you look at something like the exports minus imports, you'll see this figure. That's a fairly high percentage, 4, 5, 6% of GDP. That's reasonably high. But what's interesting is that consumption, if it was consumption driven, then you would see that this percentage would be going up, and it doesn't. It's investment. So you get a sense that it's running this trade deficit as part of taking in investment from abroad. So that's a fairly positive sign. If you're looking at your own country, that's one of the things you want to look at and see is if it's running like both China and Greece. I think that would be a good thing to look at. Is to look at this percent as a percentage of GDP and see whether it's either consumption or investment are affected. With China, I think you're going to see, the increase in investment. With Greece, you're probably going to see it more here. Yeah, I think, but that's what you want to look for. That's one of the things you want to look for. So that's, as I say, I'm giving this lecture on this, but it's to give you ideas about your own country and your own presentation. So I think that gives a good picture of the GDP component share. I wanted to this table compare so that you can just see where the countries are relative to other countries. This was in 2013, so this is a snapshot, but I wanted to compare India, the US, Japan, and China in 2013. And you can see that India, interestingly, its consumption is a lot higher. It's almost Japan, the level of Japan. And I would, it's, and it's much higher than China, much higher than China, and the investment level is lower than China. 46.6% of GDP, 33.6%. But notice how here's the U.S. and Japan, 19, 20, 21%. That's kind of for an advanced economy. These are fairly typical numbers. But here's another interesting thing: is the government is a small part of the Indian economy. Again, who knows? That could be just the government creates so little value. They don't pay the government employees very much, or the government employees are stealing so much money and they don't report it. You know, who know? You know, there's a lot of that. Also, might be this might be a misleading figure, because bribes are a big part of doing, even now, you have to do a lot of bribes in order to get anything done. So this figure might only represent the official payment that public sector workers receive, and it could be actually higher. I don't know. You know, that's and I don't know how there's no way you could measure something like that. But I just want to point out that this is a society that has a lot of there is quite a lot of corruption. So that figure might be artificially low. You can see exports and imports are higher than, it's similar to China. So it kind of has that profile. That it's a developing country. Its exports and imports are growing fairly rapidly. It's becoming a fairly large part of it's becoming more connected to the global economy. The exports minus imports are actually similar, are negative. Notice how China is running a trade surplus, but that's because China is probably a little bit ahead. China is becoming a little bit more mature than India, and India is still getting more investment from abroad. Also, the other thing is that the consumption rate is higher, which suggests the savings rate is lower. China's saving rate is a lot higher, probably. If you're going to look at China, I would expect that, comparing with India, that the savings rate in China is much higher. So that's going to be reflected in this low figure of consumption figure, higher figure of consumption figure in India, which is another thing that's driving this negative net exports. Here, as opposed to a higher savings rate in China, looking at the net exports, higher savings rate, positive net exports. So that certainly is a likely explanation, one of the explanations of that difference. So now I want to look at the current accounts. The current account components. Of course, we start that out by putting in these figures here, and then everything is in billions of rupee, Indian rupee. You can see that this is why, and this shows you why I want to. It's important, I think, to separate out the flow from the rest of the world to the rest of the world. Here, you can see this quite steady, rapid growth in income to the rest of the world. And it's growing, in general, like here, it's about double. It's a little bit more, by here it's a little bit more than double. It's more than double. That's telling you, that's the effect of foreign investment. And actually I think it's a quite positive sign, at least if you're a foreign investor and you want to invest in India, well, which we can see that their savings is insufficient for investment in India. That means they need to attract international capital. It looks like India's been successful in making the country more attractive for international investment. At one time, it was a very unattractive place. 10, maybe 15 years ago, around say in 2000, people were not excited about investing in India. It looks more attractive, and the current transfers. You can see this figure, and you see here. Look at that growth. That's very likely from investment. Investment in the country, so that's increasing. It's increasing quite reasonably rapidly. It's fairly healthy numbers. We can see here. You end up, at least when I end up here. These are my own figures. So that's one of the things is when I do this, what I do is I take the numbers that are given, use the formula for as you're given in the as I gave you in the class to calculate the current account, and then what you want to do is see when you get to the balance of payments. I'll show you my figure and the official figure. It's very different, especially in the last 2 years. And it's important to do that. And you just have to make sure that you're doing it correctly when you do that. But it's important to compare that, because these are the numbers they give. If you add them up using the GDP identities, well, you're supposed. If these figures are correct, then that should all add up. In this case, we'll see it doesn't. So then what I did was I did that current account components as a percentage of GDP. This is a plus, this is inflow, outflow, inflow, outflow. You can see that the employed property income to the rest of the world, see how that's increasing? It's under 1% and increases over 2%. That's the effective international investment. And then you can see here's the effect transfers from the rest of the world. Again, an increase in international investment interests in the country, which I suspect, based on what's going on now, as I'll discuss a little bit towards the end of the lecture, I think people are going to start getting excited. International investors are going to start getting very excited about investing in India. So we end up. And you can see the current transfers to the rest of the world. Indian investors are in general not investing a lot, although I think I've mentioned several times the big investment in Australia that an Indian mining company has made, one of the world's biggest coal mines. They're going to be digging up a lot of coal in Australia and shipping it to India. The interesting thing about that is that if you follow the Australian energy industry, or the generation of electricity industry in Australia, they're dramatically reducing the use of coal and switching to renewable resources. But they're still digging up a lot of coal, but now instead of burning it for themselves, they're shipping it outside of the country. So that's an interesting development, and much of that is going to go to India. A lot of it is going to China. In the future, a lot of it's going to go to India, it's going to fuel its increase. The increase in electricity. The interesting thing there is the Australians are making a hard effort in order to reduce their global emissions of CO2, and then they're digging up the coal in their own country to ship to another country so they can dramatically increase their output of CO2. That's the way things work. So here's what I did. Now what I took the current account and to get the capital account, and you can see the capital transfers in India, and this is true for a lot of countries, they're not very big. So the capital the capital transfers are not very large. So the balance of payments figures, and this is what I calculated here. I calculated positive balance of payment for India in 2013 and 2014. The official figure was a lot less negative than in 2012 and 2011, but still negative. So the discrepancy is very large. I don't know. I checked my figures several times just to make. I did it correctly. And that's the figure. That it does drop. The official figure is much less negative, but I'm still off by that's 2.8 trillion rupee. Let's see, 2.8 trillion. What is that? That's 60 to the dollar. 60, 40, 50 billion. That's about $50 billion. That difference. That's a pretty good difference. So I have no explanation. Maybe what it means is that these figures are fairly recent and they'll change them. That might be. It's just, and you might run into that. You might experience that in your own work. This is, if this happens to you, all you can say is, well, that's the figure that's reported. Maybe you'll try to look and see if you can find some other information. So if you do have something like this happen, come to me and say, gee, I've got this problem. I've been very careful. I've been very careful with my analysis, but the figure doesn't. There's a big discrepancy, and we'll look and see, is there any other information that allows us to. Any other information in the national accounts data? Maybe not. Maybe there isn't. So keep that in mind. You may run in. These are problems you might run into. This is a problem I experienced in doing this, and this I did this yesterday. I was updating these numbers, and it's like, well what? What's going on? I don't know. So now I wanted to look at the foreign direct investment, the balance of payments. What I did here was I had to change one of the things that the balance of your FDI investment flow is generally reported in dollars. So what you need to do when you take the balance of payments, you need to transfer. You need to calculate that to change that to US dollars. So what you have to do is you have to get the exchange rate in that year. You have to get the average exchange rate in each year with the US dollar in order to make that. So that's what I've done here. Usually the World Bank site has that information. So that's probably the best place to get it. I also I got these figures from the IRS, also the United States Internal Revenue Service. They publish so for Americans doing their taxes, and they'll show they have figures, their own estimation or their own figures for exchange rates by year. So you can go to the IRS. That's another. So there's various places that you can get it. You can get it for free, and you can typically go back a number of years. But this is important. This is a very important thing to do because the FDI investment flow is in U.S. dollars. So you have to take your balance of payments is going to be in the domestic currency. So you have to make that if you're going to look at investment flow, that's what you have to do. It sounds like a lot of work. It is a bit of work. The thing is, it's very useful. And also, one of the things that I want you to do is when you're looking at a country, try to focus as much on this information as you can. As I say, get as much of the picture that you can get out of the national accounts data. And then, once you've done a good analysis, then go out and look at something else. That's my message here, is that this helps to stay focused, keep your analysis narrow enough that you don't feel overwhelmed. That's the thing. This can seem like overwhelming, okay? But if you know what you're going to do, and what I'm trying to show you here is this step, do this, do something like this, do something like this, do something, and when you do the balance of payments, you have to go through, there's a discipline that you have to do it. When you're doing GDP, you have to do a discipline. Invest, you have to do consumption, investment, government spending, exports, imports. So you have to, it's one item after, one item, another item, another item, another. The same thing with the current account. Current account, the income from the rest of the world to the rest of the world, capital flow from the rest of the world to the rest of the world. Current account, capital account. And then now the next step here, I'm taking the balance of payments figures, changing that into dollars, so now I can look at the FDI figures and make sense out of that. So, and one of the so what I've done here is and basically the India data only goes up to 2012. Just like the data from China, at least on the UN site, it only goes up to 2012. If I was going to do something more detailed, I would try to look at the Bank of India and see if they probably do have updated FDI figures. But at this level right now, I didn't go look at that. But if you're doing you'll want to look like the Bank of China and see, or the Chinese central bank, or the Greek central bank, or to look at those figures and see if you can get something updated. So what I did was I said, well, here's the balance of payments in US dollars. Here's the actual balance of payments as reported. Okay. Then I wanted to look. Because the foreign direct investment is going to tell you, the foreign direct investment is going to explain, if there's a deficit, then this is going to tell you where some of that is coming from. So that's what we're trying to do here, is we want to find out, well, where is this, what's the change? What's causing this change in the balance of in the balance of payments? And the interesting thing here is that we get this figure, especially I want you to look at 2011, very large, a very large balance of 2011, 2012. There's a very large actual balance of payments. It's close to my figure. The figure that I calculate, it's only about $7-8 billion off. It's not that much. It's close enough. So this is a fairly large figure. So when I was doing this, I said, well, that's really, what's interesting is that your foreign direct investment flow doesn't explain very much of that. That, in other words, there's a deficit. That means there's capital coming into the country. Where is it come? Where is that capital coming from? What's the source of or assets? Investment assets coming into the country. So it's not really foreign direct investment flow. There's inflow, outflow, it's not very much. The net change in foreign reserves, the central bank isn't changing reserves very much. I said, well, what's going on here? And I noticed something, and here's, I think what I'll do is I'll go back. And this is a very unique thing about the Indian economy. These are the kind of interesting things that when you do this kind of analysis, you'll run into something that's kind of unique about an economy. And you may run into that in your own analysis. So keep this in mind. Let me go back to time. Let's go back to 1.1. I'll go. Let's see. see if I can. Let's see, does that show that? Yes, that shows that there. Okay, I'm going to blow that up. I'm going to blow that up there. It's very curious. Now, when you look at this line, you'll see the gross capital formation. That's investment. Okay. Now, almost any other country that you look at, you'll have two lines. You'll have gross fixed capital formation. That's investment in actual infrastructure. It's buildings, factories, residences, roads, electrical infrastructure, whatever kind of investment in fixed capital formation. And changes in inventories count as capital formation, because until you actually sell it, it's considered a capital asset. So that's how accounting deals with inventories. Then there's a third line here, and I don't know if you find this in any other country. And when I first looked at it, I said, well, what is going on here? It says acquisitions less disposable of valuables. And I thought, what's that? What are they talking about? Acquisitions less disposals of valuables. Well, and that's under capital formation. And then I thought about it. Then I remembered, well, India is one of the world's biggest consumers of gold. And I remembered, India consumes a lot of gold. And then I looked at this and I thought, well, valuables, they're classifying the holding of gold by individuals as capital. Do you understand what that means? It's crazy. It's crazy. It's like, do you own gold? I don't own gold. I have no interest in owning gold. Do you know what the return on, if you buy gold, it's as an asset. It's an asset. I mean, it has value. It's an asset. What's the return that asset delivers on your investment? What return, if you invest 1,000,000 yen and you buy a bar of gold, what annual return do you get on that investment? You don't have to think very hard. What return? I'm not talking about the change in the price. I'm talking about what return. What income does the gold generate? How much income does the gold generate for you? Don't have to think very hard. Close your eyes, what do you see? As my mother would say, nothing. It generates no income. It's a bar of gold. I guess it's an asset. It has value. The value will change. The market value will change. Now, the point is that if I invest in a bar of gold, I'm purchasing an asset. It is an asset. It's an investment in it's classified as a capital asset. But if I buy a building, that building is going to generate income. If I buy a bar of gold, it's going to generate nothing. So they have a line. Now, most countries, people hardly buy, whatever gold they buy is, it's a small amount. Indians buy so much gold that they have a separate line. They have a separate line for acquisitions less disposables of valuables, which they're referring to gold. That's primarily gold. So I looked at that and said, look at the number there. And this number is positive in every year. Every year it's positive. What does that mean? Every year that means they're buying more, Indians are buying more and more gold. The reason why they buy gold, and one of the things that they do, is that reasonably wealthy individuals, is because traditionally the banks are, it's the safest form of investment in India. Unless they come And people will wear, the wealthy people will basically wear it. You know, they'll go around wearing and they're doing it to protect their wealth. It's hard for the government to steal gold from you. They can't tax you. There was a story I saw a few years ago. There was a person had a safety account box. They put cash. They put a large amount of cash in the bank. In the bank, now a safety deposit box is supposed to be the bank is supposed to treat that as absolute complete safety. That you're putting that in there, and it's you know, if there's a war, it should be secure, that you should be able to get that's protected. Well, so this guy puts all of this money in. The bank, the bank was so negligent in protecting in their safety deposit boxes that insects and worms got into the safety deposit box, ate all the money. So he went and got the money. There was no money. They had eaten the insects and had eaten all the money. It was gone. So he sued the bank. He sued the bank. And the court said, sorry, you lose. That's why they buy gold. That's because the society is still in a position where people feel like they have to buy gold in order to protect their wealth. And as I say, it's an asset that has zero return. And one of the things that you'll see, I showed you the figure, how you've had this big increase in investment. A lot of it's just people buying gold with something with zero return. It has zero, so the value to the society in terms of increasing the productive capacity of the country is zero. And I didn't know this until I prepared this lecture last year. And I looked, well, what's that? And what's that? What could that be? And then I thought, well, wait a minute, Indians buy a lot of gold, and I knew that they wear the gold and the whole business, you know. That's what they do, because they don't trust the government, they don't trust the banks, they don't trust anything. Nothing, you know. So so then I looked into it and I said, well, there's gold net imports. When you take that figure, most of the deficit the increase is explained by an increase in gold purchase of the net of gold imports. So the balance of payments, the increase in the balance of payments is essentially because people were buying more gold. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff. So it's when I saw that, I realized that, well, a lot of the increase in investment was actually just people buying gold. It's not which is not a very healthy. I mean, that people have to do that in order to protect their wealth. It showed me that the society was not yet ready. You know, it suggested to me at least a year ago that the society still had a long way to go to become a major world power. And let's see, I've got, right, and I did, so I looked at this, so then I went back and I did I broke this down. I said, well, I've got to go back and look at this gross capital formation and see, you see these figures, acquisition less disposable of valuables, and that figure there. And then I went and compared that with the net gold imports. Here's acquisitions less disposable of valuables in billion US dollars. I converted it to billion US dollars. and here's net gold imports. It's all gold. It just confirmed that it was gold. It's just all gold. It's the change, it's almost, it's just, the change is all, it's just gold. So it confirmed that's exactly what it is. It's just gold purchase, and it's going up every year. They're buying more, people that are buying more and more gold because they still don't trust the banking system, the government. It's just, as I say, if you're wearing your gold, they can't come and steal. It's hard for the government to come and steal it from you, and that's it. And they won't put it in the safety deposit box because, as the guy put the cash in, if the bank is negligent, the court said, well, that's your problem. It's not the bank's problem. If you put it in the bank in order for the bank to take care of it, and the bank doesn't take care of it, well, it's your problem. Well, why would you trust it? You wouldn't trust any of it. You just wouldn't trust it. People see those stories and they run out and buy gold. So the excess, any kind of excess wealth, that's what they do. There's a lot of changes though that are coming, and I want to go over a couple of very important things that have happened that have gotten me to change. 4 more minutes. I've talked a little bit about demonetization. November the 8th, it was in the evening, about 8 in the evening, the Prime Minister got on television and said, oh, at midnight, on November the 8th, at midnight, the 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes would not be legal tender. In 4 hours. Surprise! Hi, guys. That's what he did. He got on. So 86% of the total amount of cash in circulation were those size notes. Of the total amount of cash in circulation were 500 and 1,000 rupee notes. So the Prime Minister gets on and says, oh, all that money in your pocket, in 4 hours it's going to be worthless. That's what he said. 4 hours, we're going to change everything. 4 hours is worthless. 90% of transactions were cash. 86% of the cash suddenly became poof. Now people had to go and change it in. They had to go change the cash in. But everybody was rushed, so everyone had to rush to the bank. One of the problems that they were swappable. They had a new 500 rupee note, and they got rid of the 1,000. They put a 2,000 rupee note, but they printed up too many 2,000 rupee notes, not enough 500 rupee notes. So people were changing their money, but then they ended up with, well, one, it was hard to change your money. The lines were so long. Nobody could get to the bank. The banks didn't have enough cash anyway. So they ran out of money. Nobody could change their money. The notes that they had you couldn't use them anymore. So suddenly lots of people didn't have any cash. They didn't have any cash. And if you have a 2,000 rupee note, and there's no 500 rupee notes to give you change, and you go and buy something, and the merchant's going to tell you, well, I don't have change. So the 2,000, okay, you could get a 2,000 rupee note, but you couldn't buy anything because nobody could give you any change. Because there were no the 500 rupee notes, they didn't have enough 500 rupee notes. Needless to say, this is the kind of thing that there are 2 reasons why they had a reason for doing it. Modi is not an idiot. There's a reason. One, they want to reduce illegal transactions. It's an all-cash society. When you have an all-cash society, there's all kinds of illegal transactions, including bribes of public. He's trying to reduce corruption. He's trying to reduce the black market sector of the economy. He's trying to modernize the Indian economy. It's a third world economy. So he's trying to do that, and I think they're telling us they're going to throw us out of here in just a minute So I think I'll just stop there, because I want to finish this, and I'll finish this up, because this is an important story about the demonetization. And the other thing is the goods and services tax that went into effect on July 1st of this month. So this is a dramatic, something very, very dramatic change, absolutely dramatic change. So I'll start the next lecture, and which will be the last lecture on Thursday. I'll be talking about that. So I want you to, and then what I'll do is I'll spend the rest of the lecture and I'll be discussing each of where your projects are. So please send me everything that you have at this point, where you're at. I want to see where you are, the data analysis that you're doing. So on Thursday, once I get through with talking about this, then I'll go over, because you guys, you've got just one more week after that, and then we need to talk to see where you are on your project, because I don't know where you've missed, you weren't here last week. So we'll need to talk about that. At any rate, if you can get that to me, then I can spend the class giving you feedback on your projects, and so that then you'll be able to, you two guys will be, you'll have one more week, one busy week, and then yours will be due 2 weeks from Thursday, the final. And so, thank you.